data is only so good if you actually can actually implement it as part of the fabric of the decision making. And I don't think that was always the case. And I think there was a lot of good intentions, but I think there's an element of panicking. I don't think Ten Hag and recruitment helped either. Um, whereas whereas now, I think you'll find it being, uh, forming a much sort of greater part of the decision making process.
James Ducker, Northern football correspondent at The Telegraph, long-time stalwart of the United press beat. Thank you very much for joining. How are you doing?
Pleasure, Steve. Nice to see you, mate.
Thank you. Likewise. It's you ran a piece this week on United's recruitment over the last 12 months. For those who haven't seen it, what's the gist of the article?
Yeah, I think if you look at the Arsenal game on Sunday, I think sort of 5 of the 6 signings made in 2025. So last year, played pretty prominent roles. And there's been obviously a lot of recruitment bashing at United for sort of the best part, 12 years now, and a lot of it justifiably so. But I think there are some sort of encouraging early signs in terms of the players that have been brought, I think, to the club in the last 12 months in particular. And I just wanted to sort of offer some sort of insight really into some of the processes behind the recruitment of the likes of Mbumo, Cunha, Dorgu, Aiden Heaven, Lemons, and Shesko, and just a few stories rather than just he's playing well, just a bit of background really to some of those deals and some of the differences maybe that happened in the past. And it seems to have been sort of quite well received. I mean, look, it's still relatively early for these people, and I think they have to do it consistently over several seasons before we can start to talk about bona fide successes. Of which really there have been very, very few. I would say in the last 12 years, the standout by a long way being Bruno Fernandes, who I actually think is starting to look even better. No, I think he's just been absolutely outstanding in the last couple of games. So yeah, so it was that, Steve, to offer a reflection there.
So as you rightly say, we weren't known, to put it politely, we weren't known as master negotiators or buyers of players previously. What has changed behind the scenes?
Well, I think one of the sort of details that I start the piece with is around the goalkeeper situation. So um, in 2023, Ten Hag was pretty hell bent on bringing Andre Onana to the club. Sort of, they ended up paying £47 million for him 12 months after he was available on a free transfer. And Tony Coton's the United goalkeeping scout, and he, as you'd expect and very much hope, was asked for his opinion by Ten Hag. But I think Coton felt very strongly that it was a fait accompli. It didn't really matter what his assessment was and what his input was, that Ten Hag was going to sign the goalkeeper anyway. And it did, I think, feel during the Dutchman's tenure that what he wanted he got, often perhaps against the better judgment of the recruitment team. And you only need to look at the signings in the main over that period, and a lot of them were disappointments. So I think there was quite a heated exchange between Coton and Ten Hag. The goalkeeping scouts' view was, well, what's the point in asking me, in my opinion, if you're going to sign him anyway? You go fast forward 2 years, and Coton has been banging the drum for Senna Lemons for at least 12 months, probably quite a bit longer, but at least 12 months that I know. And in fairness to Christopher Vivell, the director of recruitment, and certainly the director of football, Jason Wilcox, I think they very much listened to all sides. So that summer, there was obviously a move toward getting players with Premier League experience, in Mbumo and Cunha notably. I think if Amarin had got his way, he would have had more players with Premier League experience. He would have taken Ollie Watkins over Sheshko, and very much wanted Emi Martinez at Villa over Lomans. Now, Coton argued very strongly for Lomans, felt that the age profile, his calmness, reassurance, the ceiling, the potential, made him an exciting long-term target. And I think, you look at what he's done in since he came in October. I don't think it was for no reason that Sir Alex Ferguson himself said that United had needed that player, and look at the impact he's done. I think the defence looks a very different beast. Obviously still conceded some goals, but just a lot calmer. And so Coton pushed very strongly for that. And the difference is that the hierarchy listened to him, like they listened to both cases for Martinez and Coton. Obviously, took into consideration Amarin's wishes. But I think the feeling was that Martinez was 32 at the time. I think it might be 33 now. Had a lot of injuries. There were concerns around how that impacts on his training. And yeah, he's a big character. I think Amarin made some comment in the October about wanting my crazy guys, which I think some viewed as a reference to maybe having not got the likes of Martinez. But it's one thing to be a big character when things are going well. It's another when they're not. And I think there was some concerns around that. So I just think I'm just not sure that sort of level of due diligence has been done on all signings in the past. Well, in fact, I know it hasn't. So I think it was interesting. That does not mean that Lomans is going to be some bona fide success, but I think I think there's some real thought given there to what have gone. Look, at the time, I think there's a lot of people arguing that might have been better to bring in a keeper with Premier League experience, but fairness, he's done extremely well since he's come in. And then similar to Šeško, I mean, Ollie Watkins it was between him and Ollie Watkins in the end. Watkins would have cost at least 60 million. I think it would have been a very difficult negotiation with Villa. He was 29. There's absolutely no real sale value in that. Is there more to come from him already peaked? Versus, Šeško, where they felt he had a extremely high ceiling. I mean, I felt that was still a gamble of a signing in the sense that 2 years earlier they brought in a young overseas striker in Højlund. Now, I think one of the big distinctions, and I've written about this extensively, Steve, is Højlund, in my view, is set up to fail. Like you can never bring in a 21-year-old striker and expect him to lead the line with no backup or support around him. And obviously there was a shortage of options in attack. The alternative at centre forward was Anthony Martial, whose fitness obviously was routinely failing him and had been mercurial inconsistent anyway. So I had a lot of sympathy for Højlund, and I think he was a better striker than you might always have seen. But whereas Šeško, the views, yes, a lot to prove. But I think there's a feeling that he's got more attributes and is a better player. But also look at what he's got around him now. He's got far, far more around him, and he can be phased in and taken in and out of the team in a way. Højlund didn't have that luxury. It was him or nothing, really. So I think that will definitely aid Šeško's development. And I think when you view it in that regard, the signing makes a lot more sense. I think also there are other factors here. My understanding, certainly from I think the top of the club at United, was that he was very much Mikel Arteta and a lot of people's first choice at Arsenal. Andrea Berta comes in as sporting director, and they end up pivoting to Gyökeres and going hard down that route. I think United looked at Gyökeres as well. Amarin obviously had a lot of success with him at Sporting Lisbon, but I think there's a view that scoring goals in what was the 8th league in Europe is one thing. I don't think they were sure about how much more there was to come from him. And I think if you're looking at a toss up between those two, then I think a lot of supporters, I think a lot of Arsenal supporters wanted them to go for Šeško. So I just think there's more thought. I think there's obviously there's a debate about whether it was right to go for Šeško over a central midfielder. Obviously looked at Baleba, but obviously the money wasn't there at the end of that season. They opted to go down that route and very much strengthen the attack. Amarin may have wanted Watkins over Šeško, but was fully on board with bolstering the attack and waiting on the midfield. But you'll see, Steve, this summer, central midfield will be a priority area. I also think there might be the odd defensive reinforcement. They're obviously questions over the fitness and age of some players. Harry Maguire's obviously out of contract at the end of this season. I would absolutely be extending his deal, albeit on reduced terms. So yeah, that was some of the gist of the article. I think obviously there were other players in there as well. I mean, I think obviously if it had been a different time, you may have seen United go for a Nuno Mendes, but they were never going to get him out of PSG. It also cost an awful lot of money. I think that position ended up coming down between Dorgu and Alvaro Carreras. Obviously, previously Fernandez, who United sold to Benfica. What I am getting back is that I think there was a feeling that he had his sights set on Real Madrid. He knew they were interested. He was going to go back there. I also think there's some people at the club who wouldn't have sold him in the first instance, but they went down the Dorgu route. I think they went into that with their eyes wide open. I think they knew he was very raw, and I think they knew that his decision making needed work. But I think they looked at a lot of the base attributes, the pace, the physique, the versatility. I think they felt he could play in a lot, numerous positions, and also his character. I think anyone who's had any dealings with him, and certainly what I get back is I think he's a popular teammate. I think he's a hard worker, and I think he's a good egg in that dressing room. And as ever with United, Steve, I mean the scrutiny is absolutely relentless, and you can't be eased in like you can at Brighton or Brentford. I mean, like I always make the reference to Caicedo, who United could have brought him and probably should have brought him for next to nothing. When he goes to Brighton, he actually made a lot of mistakes in his first season, and a top player, and then he grows and he develops. The difference that you've got to do at United when you come in is the scrutiny is absolutely relentless from the outset. So it takes a certain character, I think, to deal with that. In fairness to Dorgu, he's absolutely had some highs and lows. He would be the first, I think, to say that. But he is, I've been really impressed with him in recent weeks, and it looks like he's going to have a period of time out now with injury. We don't quite know exactly how long yet, but I generally just hate to see players injured, whatever club they are. I'm absolutely gutted for him because he's riding a high, and it's a blow to the team. I think they've obviously got enough to come in. So an interesting one there. I think if you ask Michael Carrick, he'd probably like both Alvaro Carreras and Dorgu in his squad. And then Aiden Heaven again, who I was really impressed with in that very difficult winter with lots of injuries, lots of key absences, playing in a severely weakened team. He'd had some challenging sort of games early on, unflustered about it. I thought he really grew, and I thought he played. In fairness to Amarin, he was pretty complimentary about it. Not always been the case about players in public. But again, he's not going to play every week. He's going to come in and out. But £1.5 million. I think Jason Wilcox had got wind that he was having conversations with Eintracht Frankfurt, invited him to Old Trafford. He met Ferguson, met with Amarin, and there's other Premier League clubs offering quite a lot more money, better packages. But I think that they were sold on the pathway, and I think that's look, if he doesn't work out, okay, he's £1.5 million, and I think he's left-footed centre back. I think raw, yes, but a lot of potential. I think it was a really, really good signing. And if it doesn't work out, it's not a £55 million signing. You will make a lot of money on him anyway. But I think people look at what he's offered so far, and I think in adversity in difficult situations, and has done pretty well. So yeah, it's early days still. There's a way to go, but I think there's been some interesting developments.
I suppose it's worth touching on. There's been such a high turnover of staff as well as players. Obviously the landscape behind the scenes, as has been well publicised, has changed a lot. A lot of new faces coming in, settling during that time frame that you've written about. You mentioned Christopher Vivell, Michael Sansoni also coming in, play a major role in the sort of the data overhaul. What are you hearing about their relationship and how key that is to the new landscape, I suppose?
So Vivell's an interesting one. Obviously had a big part of the sort of Red Bull empire. I think obviously people know the Sheshko links. He obviously, brought him to, he was technical director or head of recruitment at Salzburg, and brought Sheshko in there, so was very familiar with the player. Had a period at Chelsea. I've heard sort of differing things about sort of what went on there, but obviously it was a short-lived time, and obviously went out. But definitely I definitely think on the younger element of players, I think that's probably where Christopher's strength is. Definitely seems to have a decent relationship with Wilcox, and the setup is obviously well thought of. I think he'll obviously have strong opinions as anyone will on it, but I think there's definitely looks like there's a bit more thought given into it. I mean, Matt Hargreaves, who's the director of football negotiations, he was obviously part of the old sort of staff, and is one of not many who's actually been kept on. I think Matt's very well regarded. Obviously, he used to work for Adidas, and yeah, I mean, he's a pretty astute individual, Matt. I think he's an important part of that team. Is often not mentioned. And then Sansoni, I mean, the data thing's interesting. I've sort of written quite extensively about this. The, they're absolutely being behind the curve, United, on data. There's no doubt about it. I mean, Liverpool had a sort of like a 10-year head start on them. United were asleep at the wheel on that. And obviously Brighton, Brentford, a little bit different in that you look at their owners and their businesses, and exceptional individuals in that field. So, but Liverpool and others, have been, not so much ahead of the curve, but way ahead of United. And in fairness to Richard Arnold and John Berta, they sort of recognised this was an issue. And a guy called Dom Jordan Kate was appointed sort of late 2021, and then sort of formally started, I think, in the March 2022. And he basically built United's sort of data operation from scratch. Brought in some very smart individuals and a good team, plenty of whom are still there, and was really was making, I think, sort of considerable ground. Give you one idea, and this is where it was not always listened to. So Liverpool under Ian Graham were able to get their data down to sort of answering a single question, which is how much will this player help us to score a goal, or in the case of defender to not concede. It was quite advanced sort of data analytics. United weren't at that point, but a lot of their data modelling had improved, and certainly around recruitment was designed at sort of keeping the bad ones away, or helping to give a greater guide around price and stuff. So Højlund, for example, obviously, a lot of fans will have felt that they should have gone for Harry Kane, but anyway, they didn't. But there's a lot of data provided on Højlund, but within it, there was also a suggestion that there should be a walkaway price at £45 million. And United ended up paying 64 down, plus another 8 in add-ons, a £72 million deal. Now, data is only so good if you're actually going to actually implement it as part of the fabric of the decision making. And I don't think that was always the case. And I think there's a lot of good intentions, but I think there's an element of panicking. I don't think Ten Hag and recruitment helped either. Whereas now, I think you'll find it being, forming a much sort of greater part of the decision-making process. What I didn't understand when Ineos first came in is Dave Brailsford did a football audit, or what was supposed to be a football audit, an audit of all the different departments. And yet he never spoke to Dom Jordan, the chief data officer. He never had long-standing meeting in. And I think when he obviously heard about this, all these quotes coming out from the co-owner about data being non-existent at the club was unfair. Absolutely no doubt that they're behind the curve, that they've been slow on the take-up, but considerable groundwork had been done on that front. And anyway, Dom Jordan ended up going that summer. And I found that whole situation quite unusual. I mean, maybe that they just wanted their own people, that's fine, but I don't understand why you wouldn't tap into some key heads of department like that But obviously, Michael Sansoni's coming now from Formula One, another good reputation. And I think that you will see that sort of process accelerated. I think the big difference is obviously is the data analytics they have will obviously naturally improve over time as one, they have more time, and two, greater investment. But I think the critical thing is that data, they let these people form part of the decision making process. They don't obviously have the final say, but what they say is taken into consideration. And I think there was a lot of data around his signing. I think the likes of Mbumo and Cunha, clearly there has to be as well, but I think they're more of a known entity. But I think when you're recruiting younger players from overseas that have not played in the Premier League, you have to do a lot of due diligence on their background, what type of character they are, what the family's like, what the people around them are like. I don't think the club have necessarily done that particularly well over the years, but they also need to have an understanding about strengths and weaknesses. And I think one of the things with Lomans, for example, is straight away the command aerially is different. I mean, the nervousness that Bayindir and Onana generated among the fan base on matches coming for high balls. I mean, Lomans is a completely different beast. He's very much more in the Petr Cech mold of goalkeepers, I think, in that regard. And look, he will have some sticky spells. He's 23. It's not going to be plain sailing. David De Gea went through this. Plenty of goalkeepers have gone through this in the past. He's young, but I think there's a lot of very, very appealing attributes there.
But you spoke about the decision-making process. Obviously, we don't have a permanent manager in place at the moment. That, the rest of the football world isn't going to grind to a halt while we make a decision on that. Obviously, transfers have to be made. How is the decision-making process, to your understanding, going about summer targets without a manager there? And I suppose with the new power balance, does it matter?
Yeah, it does matter, because I think any sporting director would say they're never going to sign a player that the manager fundamentally doesn't want. It's just not going to work. There has to be some joined up thinking, clearly. I think they're very clear that they want a central midfielder, at least one central midfielder, and I think you're going to see the likes of Elliot Anderson, Adam Wharton, and Belabor, people like that, under serious consideration. So, and I think most managers would take players like that and recognise that this is an area of the team. And Carrick himself has said, publicly, that he will be part of those conversations. So. Yeah, I don't think that's too much of a worry. I actually think like this summer is a bit clearer cut. I think Casemiro's going. Central midfield needs addressing. There will be areas in the defence. Obviously, there'll be Harry Maguire's situation will impact obviously what they do at centre back. Do they need another full back? I think the really, really challenging hospital pass of the summer was last summer and the summer before that. I think there's players that they need to move on, clearly. I think we obviously talked about the sort of improvement on the Ineos signings. I think in the first summer, I think Lenny Yoro is an interesting one. I think there's obviously is a very much a long-term signing that had Ineos all over it. Similarly, De Ligt and Mazraoui, not top players in my view, but they've both been steady. The two major disappointments with Joshua Zirkzee and Manuel Ugarte, and I'm still not clear who signed them. I think Ten Hag wanted them. I don't quite know, but I would be surprised if they're both at the club next season. There are some players that they need to get out. I think there's some players that they're going to have to make some tough decisions on. But I don't think it's an oh my God, where do you start type summer, which the previous ones have been. I think they've got a lot out of that dressing room that they didn't want it in it. And I think if they could finish the season strongly and get the Champions League positions, then it puts them on a strong footing going forward.